I know it's been a minute. I've been really had a hectic couple of weeks since my last check-in from Vermont. I'm here in the McDowell kitchen, and if it sounds a little echoey, it's because my house is getting emptier and emptier. I just got back on Friday from my first U-Haul run to Arkansas. I'm putting my stuff in storage till I find a place. We settle out on this house here, and I'm able to start looking for a new place. But yeah, I started with a little one. I drove a 10-foot U-Haul full of pretty much everything I could carry by hand, like all my bins, my fabric, and my books. Very heavy. From Philadelphia, 3 days to Little Rock. And I'm very proud of myself. I've never done that before. I'm about the biggest thing I drive is my Subaru. So I'm new experiences under my belt. And so tomorrow I go back for round 2 of 3, and it's more furniture. So I'm hiring help to load the truck and unload it on the other end. But now I'm graduating to a 15-foot truck. So wish me luck on that. But before I hit the road, I had been putting together these various notes on scrap pieces of paper. And I didn't get this updated before I went the last time. And so I thought I would just take a few minutes to close out the Vermont trip. And I do have some other things that I want to talk about. And I'm not going to get around to it tonight because I've got to get to bed and get a good night's sleep. But about Bobby's sidekick, Nicole Shanahan, his VP, and her interest in using big data AI for solving chronic illness, which is total social impact bond area. And, I had someone in one comment sort of say something like, well, can you tell us the games, like some examples of the games they want us to play? And in my opinion, this whole Kennedy candidacy is a game. It's all a game. So if you're involved in it in some way, either contributing financially or contributing your time, you're in the game. And I would say you don't really actually understand what the game is. And so I do want to spend some more time once I get a little bit more headspace, maybe after my last U-Haul trip, to unpack why his selection of her is very, very telling. But I did also want to mention, I'm off of social media, but someone brought to my attention, I guess there was this spectacle with this person who set himself on fire in front of the Trump trials and was talking about had a manifesto about a conspiracy, and a lot of it had to do with crypto. So I scanned his ratings, and I just want to point out the direction everything is headed, right? And so when I wrote a really long piece about sort of exposing this conference where people were questioning cryptocurrency, but really they were all the same people who were going to set up the computer game on blockchain for the collective version. That's exactly what's going on here. And so there's a measure of skepticism I have about the authenticity of that actual event. And, you can't really believe anything you see online anymore. And it all seems very Hollywood to me. And of course, this is consciousness management, and that the thing that was shared with me was from Newsweek. So if Newsweek is putting it out, that they're fine with putting it out because they're spinning the story in a certain direction. So from what I could tell, the story was associate the conspiracy-minded people with Trump, which they've been doing forever, which serves their purpose, right, of polarization. And then, but in his manifesto, which I was looking at, essentially it was mentioning FTX and Ponzi scheme mentioned over and over and over again. Ponzi scheme, Ponzi. So limiting it again to finance, not talking about that blockchain is actually spatial computing and signaling. And it's way more than money. And it's the digital twinning, it's the predictive analytics, it's the gamification, it's the socio-technical cyber-physical systems. That's what runs on the blockchain. So again, they're narrowing the conversation. They're using spectacle to keep it very narrow. But the one line that really stood out to me, he sort of mentioned something like, oh yeah, that Epstein-funded research at Harvard, well, that wasn't really a thing. It was just money laundering for the Ponzi scheme. And to me, that says they know exactly what they're talking about, because that among the Epstein-funded research at Harvard included the work with E.O. Wilson on eusociality. the Ant-Man, right? And evolutionary economics. And that's what the Ant computer is going to run on. The socio-technical cellular automata, you know, in my opinion, will be likely interdimensional in some aspect, quantum entanglement, computation system. So methinks the Burning Man doth protest a bit too much about his Ponzi scheme, because in my opinion, and it seems to be bearing out, what's actually coming is the commoning, right? The commoning in the face of those big tech baddies, right? Like all of the Whitney Webb, like, well, we're going to do AI, but not the Google way. We're going to do our own good way, right? And so this is the narrative that's really been set from jump, like from the lockdown. The whole resistance is, in my opinion, totally fabricated, all of it. And I feel bad for people who are still like righteously invested in the stories that are being told there. But it was all going to take you to the gamified commons. And in the name of transparency and democracy and participation and accountability and all of these things. So this spectacle of this guy setting himself on fire, which again, I'm just very skeptical that actually happened, that was not, you know, some special effect, you know, opportunity, that the reporters are all just there, you know, writing and taking the pictures and everything just so they could spin this out with Trump, you know, this Trump association. But to really try to distract people from token engineering and the social computer, the eusociality, the social insects, right? Not communism, not China the way they want you to think about China, not Russia the way they want to think about Russia, bugs. Right. It's about bugs. And so they don't want you to think about bugs. They'd rather, if you think about Epstein, that you think just about trafficking, that you don't pay attention to complexity theory or what he was doing at Santa Fe Institute or any of those things. Just throw that out the window, right? Because for goodness sakes, Bobby's, you know, techno-optimist VP candidate is going to bring in AI, right, to treat our chronic health conditions with accountability so you can have your blockchain health record, right? And I bet he's going to bring in single payer too, right? That'll be great, along with his rehab centers. So, I mean, the whole thing is just, I mean, I just put my head in my hands, like, because everyone was just going to be swept into the void, into the vortex. And I do wonder the stories that people tell themselves. Because again, like the big thing that we're supposed to be worried about is his position on Gaza, right? Like are people talking about the fact that he's advancing AI? Or are we just supposed to believe that Camelot AI is the good kind of AI, right? So think about it, people, like that's the game. You're in the game. You don't even know you're in the game. That's the game. And the rules change all the time. So getting back to Vermont, I am going to, because I don't have time to make a map and put all the pictures in this chat, I am going to just do a blog post and I'll drop this video in and then I'll just see the photo album from the second part of the trip. But here I'll give you just sort of an overview and you can see the pretty hearts that I made. Well, I don't know how pretty they were because it was still very wintry in Vermont. Let me tell you, when the second half of the trip, there was like 1.5 feet of snow on the ground in the places that I was in. And then, you know, I was just in Arkansas and it was in the mid 80s and humid as anything. So I went from like the deep of winter to the height of summer over the course of about 8 days. And sorry, I have a little bit of a headache, but I really just want to get through this. So bear with me. So I'm going to put the photos in a blog post afterwards, and you can check those out later. So I forgot to mention that before I went to Montpelier, I'd spent the night in Burlington, and I went over to the lab at the University of Vermont because they were a partner with Michael Levin in the Xenobots. So that's computational biology where they were working to essentially create living robots using these frog cells and genetic algorithms, which is the stuff that the Santa Fe Institute works on all the time, right? But we're not supposed to pay attention to that with respect to Epstein. We're just supposed to keep it very narrow focus there. So, you know, University of Vermont has a supercomputing system, and I'm not sure exactly why they're partnered with the Levin Lab. Of course, he's at Tufts, which is sort of greater Boston area, and you know, that New England, all those little states, they're not so far apart. But the contact there was Joshua Bongard, Joshua Bongard. And I was looking up his office. So he has a lab, and I didn't find the lab, but I found his office in this building on the Trinity campus. So all the stuff about trichotomy I've been talking about, it's interesting to me that it was on the Trinity campus. And so I was laying out my heart on a picnic table that was covered in snow and had all these really pretty cones from the Larch that my friend in Syracuse, we did a nice walk through the park, and we collected, my friend brought along a grocery sack. So we filled the grocery sack full of Larch cones. And I used those for a lot of the hearts, because mostly in the winter, it was all brown. Everything was like mostly brown. But bear with me, it's seasonal. So I was making the heart, and I noticed that there was a plaque next to it for the building, the office building that the office was in. Sorry, I'm a little bit spacey. And it was to this woman who is with the Gund Foundation, Gund, and that is a very rich family out of the Cleveland area. And again, we've got Ohio and Rockefeller Town. And evidently the Gunds made their money in beer, and then during Prohibition turned to Sanka, like decaf coffee or instant coffee, and then moved into various kinds of sporting ownership and arts and philanthropy. I think they own a number of sporting arenas. And one of the people, the son, so it was his Gordon Gund. It was his wife, Laura, Llura, and they gave a bunch of money to the University of Vermont for this center. And of course, it's all eco, climate, sustainability, UN type of stuff. And he's also blind, and they were living in Princeton at the time. So you've got the Princeton connection, you've got the blind connection. And the Gund family, after they got out of Sanka, they got a whole bunch of money in Kellogg, right? So then we've got the eugenics stuff and the UBI and social impact investing, that sort of thing, that with the Gunds. So you can see some of the pictures that I put up, all these banners around it about the environment and about equity and justice and resiliency. But really what we're talking about is using supercomputers to sort through algorithms to turn cells into complex, semi-living robotic artifacts, right? Which to me doesn't feel very green. It doesn't feel very environmental. And I was talking with somebody the other day, because I can't remember who it was. Another friend, when I was visiting, had mentioned about the Hermes Trismegistus. I can't remember that. If I were better with all the Illuminati stuff, I would know the second part of that. But that about the emerald tablets, like these emerald tablets. And to me, that goes with Emerald Gate Foundation. And I'm just thinking about green and where green fits into all of this, and green light. And I'm feeling like, again, you think about Vermont and the Green Mountain State and all of the green sustainability, that maybe it is sort of more alchemical in nature, sort of this mystery school alchemy, soul alchemy. So Bongard, who was at University of Vermont, his focus was on evolutionary robotics. And again, most people think robotics, they think metal parts and, they think metal, right? They don't think about cell tissue, right? But that's what they're actually using, cell tissue. And so they created these xenobots. And he was working in the area of morphology and the evolution of cognition in soft, evolved, and crowdsourced robots. So think about crowdsourced robots, all right? I think he had contracts with the NSF, with NASA, with DARPA, and the Sloan Foundation. And Sloan was doing a lot with cancer. So again, we're back to Levin, we're back to electricity, we're back to the morphic fields, we're back to cellular organization, and that depends on signaling, right? Which is going to be the digital currency and the blockchain and your token engineering. He was very interested in this idea of how the body shapes the way we think. So that was one of the things that I did in Burlington before I went to Montpelier. And so the Vermont Advanced Computing Center, their initial big supercomputer was an IBM supercomputer called Blue Moon Cluster. And that was 2003, and that was supported by NASA. And then in 2019, they got a new supercomputing cluster that was called Deep Green, and the Deep Green was NVIDIA. right? And so the NVIDIA green with envy, and green is NVIDIA's logo. So you've got IBM Blue Moon and NVIDIA, the deep green cluster for their supercomputers to make their living robots. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second and then pull up a screen share with the map. It's a map that I was working on with Brandy and Leo. Gosh, it's been over a year, and we didn't get actually a chance to talk about it all yet. But Brandy's based in Florida, and she had brought up this article about the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. And I was looking into it, and at the time, talking about resilient solutions, the partner in this program was called the Institute for Sustainable Communities. And I was interested because when I looked it up, this Institute for Sustainable Communities is actually in Montpelier, Vermont. And like it goes back, let's see. So it says this guy, George Hamilton, had been working with Institute for Sustainability for 29 years in 2019. So that's like 1990. Now we know that Vermont has a brand as being very green. So he founded this with Vermont Governor Madeleine Kuning in 1991 to train leaders around environmental issues. And it was an international group. And then in 2005, they began to focus on the climate crisis. Now, 2005 is just a couple years before all of the social impact finance stuff started to take off too. And again, it's all about decarbonization. And so you can see the tagline here is Montpelier, Vermont. And so I thought, wow, that's really interesting. The Institute for Sustainable Communities has led more than 115 transformative community-driven sustainable projects in 30 countries. So this is a very big footprint. I mean, Vermont is not a very big state. And to have, I was in Montpelier. Essentially for a state capital, it has like two main streets. Like they have a T. And yeah, there's like littler streets that branch off, but there's sort of mostly two main streets. One has the Capitol on it, and then there's the other one that has the retail. So to have, and again, look, 535 Stonecutters Way. That's not, just tell you right there. The Masons, I guess. There's a lot of granite up there in Vermont. And so these are some of the people that are involved. This guy, Rick Barton, he was at USAID, the UN, the Center for Strategic and International Studies at Princeton, Social Council of the United Nations. Sounds like a guy who's really going to be in with social impact finance. So that's Rick Barton, who's on the board. Here's another guy who's on the board, a leading expert. This is J. Marshall Shepard, leading expert in weather and climate. And he's in University of Georgia, right? So very militarized there. And a research meteorologist at NASA Goddard, and with the Earth Sciences Advisory, and working with the Nature Conservancy of Georgia, and urban meteorology and extreme weather. So the weather, and I have to say, like the geoengineering is really getting me down lately. It's really, I'm finding it super annoying. So here, Institute for Sustainable Communities, founded in 91 by Vermont Governor Madeleine Kuning and former ISC President George Hamilton. And so they supposedly do lots with the community. Okay, so who is, so here's George Hamilton. Let's see. He was a planning director for the state of Vermont, and he was an advisor to Kunin. He was connected to the New England governors and Eastern Canada premiers that organized the first international conference on sustainable development in North America in 1989. And, again, as someone who identified as a very nice NPR liberal, and again, somebody who does really care about the environment, Vermont has this certain ethos. Now, I will say, I think it's actually Vermont is in a position to really be set up for this commoning project, this sort of, because it has a populist lean of both like the progressives and the conservatives. And it has like the American salt of the earth, real people kind of vibe, and they have the town meetings. And so it's actually perfect for these tokens, like this token trading game that's going to come up. And it's a small area because they usually go to areas that are poor, that need money, that are rural, that don't have a high population to pilot these things. And so I feel like Vermont has been set up for this for the past 40 years, looking like. Yeah, so, very much about social justice and climate solutions, which is all linked in with the token finance. So Kunin, she had this sort of ethos, a woman, progressive, powerful, influential. She, in addition to being interested in sustainability, shocker, she was also into the Goals 2000 and education technology. So, that's really interesting to me. She helped establish the Office of Educational Technology in the Department of Education. So it's all about the data. It's all about the signaling, whether it's environmental signaling with nature or signaling of consciousness with children. She was born in Zurich, and she was the Swiss ambassador under Clinton. So I think that's pretty interesting. She has the Swiss connection. And again, Switzerland, like besides the banking, has all of the Jung connections and now the blockchain connections. So one of the people that she worked with on the environmental issues in Vermont in the 80s was this guy, Jonathan Lash. And guess what? He was an attorney for the Natural Resources Defense Council, right? So there we go. We loop it right back to Bobby and his everyone an energy entrepreneur. He was former president of Hampshire College, and he was a president of the World Resources Institute and a senior staff attorney with NRDC, also with the Peace Corps, educated at Catholic University, and advising Kunin. So this is important, right? The quantified self, the linking of social systems to environmental systems as a complex system, a complex emergent system, where they're managing chaos and order and using that with predictive analytics and AI and spatial computing and sensors and the Internet of Bio-Nano things and the frequency and now the lights and the photonics. It's really complicated, guys, and we need to talk about it, and we need to not pretend that the health freedom movement is outside of it, because in many ways they're driving a lot of it. A lot of it is going to be coming from the health freedom movement. And it's not going to be framed as woke. It's going to be framed as something else. And so the World Resources Institute, and this is where it goes back to Florida again. Stephen Ross, who I talked about a lot with Flow, he's a New York real estate developer. Originally, he has close ties to Miami. I'm not sure if he's originally from Miami, but he has a lot of money in Florida, again, blockchain, crypto center. And he's working on environmentalism, but he's also doing affordable housing. So that's going to be your smart housing with your UBI. And, I had a friend mention to me that there was a webinar at San Jose State, like AI futures or the future of AI, something like that, within the past week. And as part of that, they were talking about floating a UBI proposal for all the people put out of work by AI. And that's going to be Flow, and that's going to be Stephen Ross, and that's going to be sustainability. And again, I wish I could find this link, but I remember back in the day that there was a video that I watched where a woman said, in the future, you'll be paid to poop in a proper toilet and get 8 hours of sleep a night and do et cetera, et cetera. And so like this gamified wellness, preventative healthcare, fixing chronic illness, all of that's going to be baked into the game, and it's all going to be tied to the built environment in the name of sustainability and climate. And again, Vantage Point Capital Partners, Bobby's, he's a managing partner. They're all about that. They've always been all about that. So anyway, I wanted to sort of put this out there because the ed tech, Florida is a center for the ed tech. And there's all these New York billionaires who were pouring money into DeSantis, including not New York, of Bala Cynwyd billionaire, Jeffrey Yass of Susquehanna Investment Group. And so they're, working with the United Way and the Chambers of Commerce and Open Data and Bloomberg What Works Government, and it's all being integrated with education choice and vouchers, and it's all going to be technology, tech forward, personalized learning, and that's something with Vermont, when I was doing the education work, Jane and Bernie Sanders, they were all about like this free college is going to be on blockchain, guys. It's going to be gig skills badges. And Jane was all about, Bernie's wife, her career is in youth development and education, continuing education. And so she was all about everybody having a personal learning plan, an IEP for everyone. And that's going to be your AI learning coach, right? So anyway, when I was in Vermont, in Montpelier, I stopped at the Co-op grocery store to get some snacks for the drive. And right next to it was the Institute for Sustainable Communities and the Nature Conservancy. In the Nature Conservancy office there, of course, they're closely connected to these early social impact bonds, parametric insurance projects. I think the coral reef, they were coral reef projects, one in Mexico and one in Hawaii. And I think they might have even also been linked to social impact bonds. So parametric insurance in these bonds. So like right by the downtown Co-op in Montpelier, tiny little town, got a lot going on beneath the surface. And this is what I'm saying. Like if you look where you're at, you're going to see that there's a lot more going on. Okay, so I'm going to take a break and just go back to chatting. All right, so that gets me through Montpelier. So after I left, I actually, I forgot that the Eclipse went through Vermont because I was trying to avoid Arkansas, but I ended up in the line of the Eclipse. And I had some wonderful hospitality with someone who checks out the research that we're doing, and in Lincoln, Vermont. So I spent a couple of days and had a chance to be on some nice snowy ground for the Eclipse. We did sort of more of the inward focused thing than the looking at it and watching it per se, but it was fabulous. And the whole theme of the whole week for me was just like water. It was a bit miserable early in the week. It was a lot of rain and sleet. But the snow was beautiful. The streams of Vermont were amazing. And it was a really pretty place. I just don't think I could hack the winters. But really, really exquisite place. So I'm so grateful to have had the chance to spend some time there. So on the way to Lincoln, I passed Waterbury, Vermont, and I wanted to go see the flavor graveyard of Ben & Jerry's, which I guess Ben & Jerry's is headquartered in Burlington, but their factory is in Waterbury. And so Waterbury was between Montpelier and Lincoln. So I pulled over and I didn't realize it was like an amusement park kind of thing. And it cost money, so I wasn't going to pay to go in. But I did take pictures of all the stuff that I didn't have to pay to see. And it's interesting when you think about like the whole tie-dye, peace, hippie vibe that Ben & Jerry's puts out. And now that we know what peace is, and now that we know what like tie-dye rainbow stuff is, and that maybe the Summer of Love wasn't exactly what we thought it was, it's quite interesting. And the reason I wanted to go to Ben & Jerry's specifically is because they're one of the first B Corps, benefit corporations. And all of that stuff was developed at the B Lab outside of Philadelphia on the main line in like, I can't remember if it was Berwyn or Villanova. I think it was Berwyn. So they're setting up all the impact metrics for the good capitalism, right? And this is going to be like the Oneida community stuff that I'm talking about, in my opinion, is that they're going to like uplift the terrible corporate culture, and then they're going to swing back. And I think the swinging back will move more towards cooperatives, which is, again, why Vermont is a good place to try this stuff out. And not that I'm against cooperatives. It's just I don't want them to be part of the ant computer. Like, I don't want it to be part of a token economy. I don't want to be hijacking collective subconscious to do this. But it's all about the narrative. So they create problem, reaction, solution, terrible capitalism, and then we're going to have the kinder version, right? And Ben & Jerry's is definitely like put out in front as the, oh, look, we have a free ice cream day. You know, you can come and have a free scoop of ice cream on us. And, you know, I do have some questions about the whole like cold chain, you know, and the stuff that was related to the vaccine delivery system and them having to be cold and how that overlapped with the ice cream industry. That was kind of interesting. But okay, so I'm driving through Waterbury, and I look over and I see a historic plaque, and it says like Waterbury Hospital. And I'm like, and then I see this giant complex, this old historic complex. I'm like, oh, turn around, go down. I'm like, is that a mental hospital? Yes, it's one of those giant mental hospitals. So it was like the Vermont State Mental Hospital from the late 19th century. At one point, it had 1,700 people in it, covering 117 acres in this small town. What's going on, people? I mean, there's something not right with all of these mental. So then it was converted to state office buildings, of course, right? The mental asylum. And there was a really strange art sculpture installation outside. I was there on a weekend, so I just kind of pulled over, and it was boulders, and then it had these weird metal sheep on it. And it was donated by an art patron who was from Philadelphia. So that was strange. So you can sort of look at that picture when you go through the photos. But yeah, so the Waterbury, the Vermont State Mental Hospital, eventually closed. And so I'm listening to, on this ride across, the Stealing Fire book for the second time, because I've got more scaffolding to really hear what they're saying. And I was listening to this part about neurotheology. And what they were saying is that with these measurements, if you believe the measurements, that the brain interacting with national brands like Nike or Apple or whatever has a similar pattern to a brain interacting with a religious figure. I don't know, like conceptually or an icon or something. So like thinking about religion and spiritual figures is the same as thinking about corporate culture, which is interesting. So then I pull into the Ben & Jerry's, and I'm not realizing it's a big thing. I just think there's going to be a little parking lot over to the side. And there's literally the high school kids with the cones, like, you know, parking people in. And this is Sunday morning. This is a Sunday morning that I'm driving in. And I'm kind of bowled over. And, you know, people were just gaga over this whole thing. I was there early, and so was the beginning of the day. And, you know, all these photo ops and people, they were just beside themselves for corporate culture. I mean, it was just a corporate branding experience. And I kept thinking, like, of course it's a Sunday, right? And I'm listening to this neurotheology about interacting with national brands and your, you know, interacting with your understanding of religion and faith and God. And yeah, so that was something. I didn't leave a heart there, but I did take some photos. Okay, yeah. And then, yeah, just thinking about the whole altered states of consciousness stuff and the Grateful Dead and Cherry Garcia. I guess that was 1987 that they came out with that. The plant started in Waterbury in 1985. The whole Grateful Dead, I don't know, guys. Grateful Dead, interdimensional ant computer. Okay, so that's that. And so then it turns out, so I visited my friend, wonderful space, really warm and welcoming. And I have to say, like, it was just the right thing to be able to be in a like small group of like strong, independent women, like getting stuff done and enjoying each other's company and having a good time and talking deep thoughts and getting out in nature. And it was great. Like it really is what I needed at this point. To have some good role models for what that looks like, what the next step looks like for me. And so in the space, it was like several sort of little buildings, and there was a beautiful, when they had dug the water line, you know, boulders everywhere. And so they placed a stone and then a stone on top of it. And it was like, to me, it was just exactly the star watching rock from the Wrinkle in Time, the Madeleine L'Engle's Time Quintet series, and like sort of the time travel star watching rock. And I'm like, this is it. So I put heart right there, and yeah, and enjoyed playing in the snow and being in the water, different kind of water, crystalline structures. So, okay, so what else? So it turns out Yeah. So as far as the eclipse, I didn't actually watch it. I was like inside being like the contemplative thing, but I did kind of peek out the window and I saw it get dark across a tree, this beautiful pine branch. And then the roosters were crowing, and then someone was playing a banjo in the distance, and it was very wonderful. Okay. And it turns out, so Lincoln, Vermont is pretty remote. It's in the middle of the state, but it's way back. So there's a town of Bristol, which is sort of a bigger town, and then Lincoln is further in, and then this location was sort of even further up. And they describe the area of Lincoln as like a Tibetan singing bowl. It's this beautiful, which is important later when I talked about the Menla thing. And so a neighbor, another resident of Lincoln, is Martine Rothblatt, who was sort of the communication satellite mogul, turned life science, human genome researcher, biotech, now electronic aviation pioneer, who was a leader in developing Sirius radio, SIRIUS, Sirius, and uniting the world through frequency, right? And was very active in international treaties on satellite spectrum allocation, working with the FCC, working with NASA, and is now doing all sorts of biotech work under United Therapeutics, doing 3D printed organs, and also a total transhumanist. And she, I guess, no, he knows. She married this person, Bina Aspen, and they worked with Hanson Robotics to make a robot of Bina. And this robot of Bina, which is kind of like the Sophia and Grace robots, but the wife is African American, so it's black robot, and they had her teach a class at West Point. I don't know if it was a whole class or just a session, but that's where I first saw Bina 48. And there's a woman who's active with, trying to see where it is, the Berggruen Institute. Oh, Stephanie Dinkins, I think. And she works with the Berggruen Institute with this robot. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And the electronic aviation is with these electric helicopters. And there's this guy, Kyle Clark, who's sort of an odd figure based out of Burlington with something called Beta Technologies. And so somehow Rothblatt and Clark, who's just also moved to Lincoln, are doing all this stuff with electric helicopters, which to me kind of brings back the whole Pitcairns, the Harold Pitcairn and his early helicopter work, and he was at odds with the government the whole time in the 30s. But of course, we know that like Uber and all of these people are trying to come up with new kinds of like mobility electric flying machines. So the transhumanist part of Martine Rothblatt, there's this thing called Terrasem. It's essentially joyful mind uploading, and they started working on it in 2002. His son Gabriel is a pastor. He evidently he lives in Florida, and he ran for Congress in the Cape Canaveral area. I don't think he won. But this Terrasem mind uploading project has locations in Bristol, in Melbourne Beach, Florida, and I'm not sure one other place maybe. So I went to Bristol to try to find it, and it was unclear. There were two addresses. One was Face the Park, and it had there was a slogan written across the door that said Animus Vale, ANIMUS VALET. And when I looked that up, what that meant in Latin, it said something like courage availeth, avail, or it was something about courage. But I didn't really see that. And to me, animus feels like spirit, and vale means farewell. So the whole mind uploading in the spirit and the consciousness, that's kind of interesting. The other building looked kind of like an apartment building, and it was right next to a liquor store. So when I'm driving in to Bristol, like before I get to the town, I'm coming from Lincoln and I'm driving towards Bristol. There's a giant boulder outside the town. Again, this town full of the transhumanist stuff. And it's from the 1890s, I think. And someone painted on the boulder the Lord's Prayer. Right? Lord's Prayer right there. And this boulder is like 20 feet tall. It's really big. It's the whole thing. And it's kind of triangular, almost like a wedge shape. It wasn't blocky. It was sort of a triangular kind of shape. So I pulled over, read the Lord's Prayer, went into Bristol, was looking, and then over this apartment building, which was next to the liquor store. And so I parked in the grocery store parking lot and I walked over. And the liquor store said spirits and redemption, which it really just came, the whole idea of like transhumanism and the soul and the spirit and the redeeming and the Lord's Prayer. And then over this apartment building, and it's not unusual, but there were like a dozen vultures like flying all over this. So I noticed that. And then I went over to the park to make a heart, and I made it in the fountain because I didn't want to, I wasn't quite sure about the building. So I figured I'd just because it was all about water. Now the fountain was drained, but there was a bit of a puddle. So I reached out and put some of my stuff touching the water. And on my way there, I could see in the back parking lot, there was a shop that had another big peace sign, like rainbow peace sign, like a big one, like, like a restaurant or something. But the sign was maybe, 8 feet across. It was a very big peace sign. But it was right next to the veterans parking area. So it's the juxtaposition of like, this parking is just for veterans, peace, right? And so I laid down the heart there, and I do want to thank my friend, because I keep running out of stuff because I keep thinking like I'm moving and I'm trying to get rid of, not get rid of, but get all of the materials I have. I can't keep accumulating them. So my friend Juliana that we went to Lidditz together with, I still had some things left over. So I used the sort of the last of her things on the heart in Bristol to sort of neutralize the Terrasem techno-transhumanism from Martin Rothblatt and her compatriots. Oh, and I do want to mention too, in the context of these AI robots, when I was talking before about Robert Bosnak, who was the sort of the Jungian guy who was interested in the Asclepian healing caves, he and his son developed something called Attune, which was these AI companions for loneliness that are going to be set up for loneliness, social impact bonds. So you can see how these companion robots are going to kind of slip into how things work. Okay, so that is the end of that. And so then I got on the road, and it was like a long drive home from Bristol. And it was even longer because I took the slow way. So it took me about 12 hours to get home. Normally, I think it might have been 6. And I was listening. I decided to revisit Children of the Mind by Orson Scott Card, which was sort of the final book in that 4-book series. And as I'm listening to it, it mentioned something about this Shinto philosopher. And, my friend Sean had pointed out, I don't know if it's while I was up there or right before this, and I don't know if you pronounce it Menla or Menla. It's Menla. So apologies if you know how it's pronounced properly and I'm doing it wrong, but I'll say Menla. So there's this place outside of, you get off the thruway at Saugerties, and then you go through Woodstock, Woodstock, New York. And this is the New York Thruway. So you get off the New York Thruway, you go through first Saugerties, and then Woodstock, and then Phoenicia. So like Phoenicians, like Phoenicia. And then you go beyond Phoenicia and on this creek, Esopus Creek, I think. And way in the back is this Tibetan sanctuary, cultural center. And it was founded in the 80s. Actually, it was founded in 2002. The Tibetan Cultural Center was founded in 1987 in New York by the Dalai Lama. And this Tibet house was in New York for many years. Lots of celebrities connected to to the Tibet House. Then in 2002, they were given this property to develop this sort of sanctuary and shrine. And the director, his name is Gandhi Thurman, and he's the brother of Uma, the actress Uma Thurman. And Gandhi and Uma's parents are Robert and Nina. And Robert is a professor at Columbia University of Tibetan Studies, and he is a close friend of the Dalai Lama, who we know is like all connected to the World Economic Forum and all the stuff in the UN and all the stuff that we know about. So Robert has a PhD in Buddhanology from Harvard. He was an admirer of Buckminster Fuller, and he's the board president of this Menla Institute. Now, his wife, Nina, is a former Swedish actress, and early on in her youth, she was married to Timothy Leary for a time, and they met in Millbrook, New York, where they were doing all the LSD experiments. So Robert and Nina handmade this house in Woodstock, New York, and then this whole Menla thing is a whole family affair with those guys. And let me see. So the interesting thing about this particular location, there's not a lot of, it's in a unique spot, and it's speculated that it's another sort of Tibetan singing bowl type of thing. It's ringed by these little low mountains, that it was an impact crater from a meteor. And then it was eroded out, and then a mountain was put on top of the impact crater, and that it has a slightly lower gravity or something there. So it's a very unique thing. And and there's a boulder there that's supposed to have a spirit in it, or a spirit was invited to be in this boulder. So I thought, okay, I'm going to go put a heart there. And it was way out of the way, but it was beautiful. Again, driving along these rushing streams, and it's on the Panther Kill area and Panther Mountain, if you want to look that up. And yeah, so I put out my heart outside the gate because I wasn't sure how policed it was. And then I pulled in, and they have like a retreat and a spa, and you can camp there. But it's kind of, again, this is sort of the who's who, of people who get to go to Menla. So I just walked in like I belonged, and I strolled around, and I took some pictures. You can see the pictures. And I was looking for this boulder, and there's a lot of boulders, in upstate New York and in Vermont. And I saw a couple I thought might be the boulder. And I thought, okay. But then on the way out walking, there was a boulder that had like a little rope around it, and there was a bench. So I'm like, that's got to be it. So I sat on the bench. Actually, I paused because my lovely friend who does the origami, which is so relevant to sort of the nano assembly and interdimensionality, had made me a lovely origami box with 4 tumbled stones in it. So, and there were 2 stones already on the bench. So I ran up to my car, and I can't remember which one, but it was, if my friend remembers, it was sort of tan and white striped and very smooth and tumbled. And it almost looked like a caramel. But, and so I set that along with the other 2 stones. And, I was just quiet with the rock for a while, and was sort of like, any guidance would be appreciated. So then, and Philip Glass, the composer, is the vice president of the board there. And there are a lot of celebrities connected. Okay, so then I keep driving. So that's, just to mention like weird synchronicities, I was just going through back roads on the way, and I ended up getting on the thruway in Troy. Now, my husband's father's family was from Troy, and I'd done a lot of research on them at the time. We had a lot of their family papers, and I organized them all, and I was interested. And at one point, the family burial plot is in Troy, and it's in this historic cemetery. I think it's called Oakwood. It's up on a hill above the city, and it just so happened. And we went there once, one holiday, one winter break. We were staying in the Berkshires, and we drove over to Troy, and we saw the family burial ground, including his grandparents. And don't like I'm coming down this road. It's not even a state highway. It's just this little road. And I'm looking over. I'm like, that's the same cemetery. So, anyway, as I close out my official affiliation with the McDowell family, though I guess I'll always be connected through my child, but I ended up pulling in, and it was beautiful buildings, like Richardsonian Romanesque buildings, Victorian buildings. And I went down to the office, which was open, and because you think you know where things are in cemeteries, but everything kind of looks alike. And so they pulled out a map and showed me where to go. And I took my leave of the McDowells, and I sort of asked for some grace from my husband's mother and his grandmother, because I think I never got to meet them because they died before I met my husband. But Hannah, Laura, and Dorothy, I think they would have liked me. I think I would have liked them. And I miss that we never got to connect in this world. Maybe some other life we're around at the same time. But looking for blessings from the women folk, on this next phase. Sorry, I'm going to take a little drink. So yeah, so I left a lovely heart there, too. And yeah, so I kept going, and then I went on. And so eventually I got to Orange County, and I had mentioned about the Falun Gong and the Qigong and the Epic Times and the conservative, Chinese multimillionaire, billionaire, I don't know, has his whole program of the Falun Gong set up in Deer Park, Orange County, New York. And so as I'm driving through, I see Chinese lettering, and it says New Century Films. So I pull over. I'm like, this has got to be the Falun Gong stuff. So I, big cameras, no trespassing, but I took a picture, and I made a very simple stone heart filled with dandelion greens. And it's interesting, this road that wrapped around, and it was a horse farm. It was an equestrian training area that they had redone as a film studio in 2018. And it's part of this Aurora Films. And again, think Aurora and Dawn and Lucifer and Luciferian and Light. And they had some weird stuff set up on the lawn. And but the whole road was part of these Mohawk, I think, Indian raids. So there were all of these historic markers like ringing the property that was this equestrian property. And when I just looked it up, so this was established in 2018. Since then, they've already done 60 films. And from what I can tell, it sort of seems like they're all about sort of morality tales. It seems sort of like the Hallmark Channel, kind of. But the equestrian area, the horse farm that they bought, was a former site that the Moonies used for equestrian training. So it was Sun Myung Moon bought, it was his property that the Falun Gong bought. So go figure, right? That's super fascinating. And then, so the last thing is, and this was probably the weirdest one. So if you're looking at the photos, if you don't feel like looking at all of them, scroll down to the last ones, because I'm driving through. So I didn't want to go back on the highway. So I went through the back roads through Delaware Water Gap, which is like one of my first jobs out of graduate school. And I had a sort of a temporary work job with the National Park Service. And we were doing, taking photo documentation of Delaware Water Gap and the farms they were supposed to have flooded the water gap, but they didn't actually. And so there were all these falling down farms. So that part of my first postgraduate work project was taking pictures. So it was really nice to go back through Delaware Water Gap. And then on the far side, it goes to East Stroudsburg, and then you can get on the turnpike, the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and come back. So I'm coming into the East Stroudsburg, and I catch this glimpse of gold out of the corner of my eye. And I'm like, what is this? And then I keep going, and then there's more. And so I have to pull over. And so I get out, and this one heart actually was a little nicer because there was like a tulip tree, the purple and pink flowers. So I was able to use a little color instead of just brown and rocks. And there were some scary statues. Now, I don't know, and again, I'm not anti-Buddhist. I don't know what it's all about. And there were a lot of golden statues. They looked kind of menacing, actually. Some of them had very big fangs and like crowns with skulls on them. And then there was one with like many arms, but he was stepping on people. Like there was a little old man, a little old woman, and he was stepping on them, but it didn't look like nice stepping on. It looked like mean stepping on. And so I was like, okay. So I made a heart there, and then I went back, and it was this falling down resort from the 70s. And there was a whole courtyard with like another Buddha and a big bell, and there were like peacocks and chickens and barking dogs. I was a little like nervous that the dogs were going to come and chase me, so I kind of took some pictures quickly and left. But yeah, so it turns out that this was the Jin Yin Temple of Sino-Esoteric Buddhism. And it was established in 2017. And supposedly this was some variety of secret occulted tantric Buddhism from this remote Guangxi area of China. And the leader was this Vajra Jinki Huan Li. And evidently, this guy is a mover and a shaker, and he was the keynote at the National Prayer Breakfast in 2017. And then the next year, everyone thought it was he gave such a great speech that they all lined up these associations with divinity schools at Harvard and Yale, at the University of Chicago and Catholic University to create this World Peace Center in East Stroudsburg at this like dilapidated 1970s resort. And yeah, to create this inclusive spiritual space for all beings, which also to me feels like the noosphere. Yeah, so I sat down with the Rock and Menla, and then it took me to the Falun Gong and then the Sino-Esoteric Buddhism. And in peace, I'm just not sure that we know what that means. I think that means something other than what most people think. The homeostasis in the interdimensional ant computer. So, okay, so that's all I got tonight, guys. I do want to come back and talk more about Miss Shanahan and how her traumatic childhood experiences and her techno-optimism are going to play into soulbound tokens and social impact bonds. But that's going to have to wait for another day. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm sorry, I'm not quite on the top of my game, but I'm a little tired, and I've got a big day ahead of me tomorrow. So, keep me in your good wishes and prayers as I'm on the road. I am doing this 2 more times. So Philly to Little Rock, and then another time, and then by mid-May, I'll be down, and I have like an Airbnb rented for a couple months in Little Rock. That'll be my home base. So new things ahead. It's hard and sad. I've been crying a lot. But I've got everything shrink wrapped and ready for the movers to help get stuff on the truck tomorrow, and using lots of my quilts to wrap around my furniture with this weird shrink wrap. And yeah, so to new beginnings. Good night, everybody.